The alien queen paced back and forth in her massive throne room, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Her kingdom, once filled with peace and pride, now felt empty. The throne, which once symbolized power, seemed cold. The queen could feel it deep in her bones. Something was terribly wrong. Her two sons, heirs to the throne and the future of her empire, had vanished without a trace. One moment, they had been with her, discussing the future of their people. The next, they were simply gone. No one could explain it. They had disappeared from their chambers without a sound, without leaving even a hint of where they had gone. Her fury bubbled up inside her. She had spent centuries building her empire, and now it was being threatened by a mystery. Her sons were the key to everything. Her legacy, the future of her people, the strength of her rule. If they were lost, what would become of her kingdom? What would become of her? The queen's soldiers had scoured every corner of the palace. They had searched the forests outside, the mountains that bordered their lands, and even the deep caves below the palace. They had found nothing. The two young princes were simply gone. As the days passed, the queen's anger only grew. She demanded that her most trusted advisors find answers, but no one had any clues. The palace was silent, the air thick with fear and confusion. "Where are they?" the queen shouted, her voice echoing through the hall. She stood still, her chest heaving with anger. "Why has this happened? Who took them?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered. Her guards, who once stood tall with pride, now seemed uneasy. They didn't know what to do. No one did. The queen's empire, which had once seemed unstoppable, now felt fragile. Every night, she sat alone in her private chambers, her mind racing. What happened to her sons? Had they been taken by a rival? Was it an attack from another alien race? Or was there something even darker at play? In her moments of doubt, the queen felt a fear that she had never experienced before. It gnawed at her, tugging at her thoughts. She had ruled with an iron fist for centuries. She had never known weakness, never known what it felt like to lose. But now, in this moment of uncertainty, she felt it. She felt the cold weight of loss. The queen clenched her fists. She would not be weak. She would not let her empire crumble. If her sons were taken, she would find them. She would tear the universe apart if she had to. No one would dare challenge her rule. Send a message to all planets. The queen ordered the captain of her guard. "Tell them that whoever has taken my sons will pay with their life. No stone will be left unturned. We will find them." Her voice was cold, filled with authority. But inside, her heart pounded. Every passing moment without her sons only deepened her fury. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But little did she know, the answers were not in her empire. They were far from the reaches of her kingdom, hidden in a place she never imagined. As the queen's command echoed through the palace, the stars above her seemed to grow dimmer. In the silence of the night, something stirred in the distance. Far away, on a planet unknown to the queen, two young alien princes lay asleep, unaware of the chaos their disappearance had caused. They were not lost, not yet. But what they didn't know was that the world they had left behind was already beginning to change, and the fate of their empire was no longer in their hands. Days passed, and the queen's fury only grew. Her soldiers were still scouring the corners of her empire, but there was no sign of the princes. Every search brought back nothing but more questions. Her palace was filled with whispers, and the once unshakable confidence of her people began to falter. The queen could feel it. The balance of her empire was shifting, and then, just as her hope began to fade, a message arrived that would change everything. It came from a distant world, one that the queen had never paid much attention to. A small, insignificant planet, inhabited by humans, primitive, weak creatures. They had always been beneath her notice. But now, this planet would hold the answers she desperately sought. The message was brief, just a few words. "The princes are alive. They are on Earth, sleeping." At first, the queen thought it was a mistake, a trick, or a false lead. But something about the message felt different. She had ordered every communication network in her empire to search for her sons, and now, here was a message from a place no one had even considered. Send a fleet immediately, the queen commanded, her voice cold and determined. I want them back alive. Within hours, her best soldiers were on their way to Earth. The journey was long, and as the fleet approached the planet, the queen's thoughts raced. How had her sons ended up here? What could this strange world hold that had drawn them to it? As the fleet landed, the queen's soldiers made their way across the unfamiliar terrain, their advanced technology glinting under the harsh sun. The human world seemed so primitive to them. No great cities, no advanced weapons, nothing like the alien worlds they had conquered. Yet, something was pulling them forward, guiding them to a specific location. They arrived at a small village, where they found the princes lying asleep on a human's chest. It was an odd sight. The princes, who were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and arrogance, were curled up peacefully, as though they had not a care in the universe. The human, a simple man, was holding them as if they were his own children, completely unaware of the significance of what was happening. The soldiers stood frozen in disbelief. How could this be? The princes, the heirs to the most powerful empire in the galaxy, were lying in the arms of a human, like infants. It made no sense. The queen's sons, raised to be warriors, had always shown nothing but disdain for humans. How had they ended up in this position? Bring them back, the captain of the queen's army ordered, breaking the silence. But even as he spoke, he felt an unsettling chill in the air. He couldn't explain it, but something about this scene felt wrong. As the soldiers carefully moved toward the princes, the human stirred. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the bright sunlight. He seemed confused, but not frightened. In fact, he looked almost calm, as if he had been expecting them. "Who are you?" the human asked, his voice low but steady. "What do you want?" The soldiers froze. This human, this ordinary man, was speaking to them as if he wasn't afraid, as if he knew something they didn't. It was unsettling. The captain stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his weapon. "We've come to take them back," he said, his voice sharp. "They belong to us." The human didn't seem to flinch. Instead, he looked down at the princes, still fast asleep in his arms. "They're not mine to give away," he said softly. "But if you want them, you'll have to wake them." The soldiers were now more confused than ever. How could this man speak so casually about the princes? How could he not recognize their importance? Suddenly, one of the princes stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he blinked up at the human. Then, slowly, he turned his head to look at the soldiers surrounding them. He didn't seem shocked. He didn't even appear to be afraid. He just looked tired. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The queen's soldiers stood still, waiting for the prince to speak. But he said nothing. He just stared at the human, his gaze soft, as if this strange world and its inhabitants were not so foreign after all. The queen's soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. What was happening? The princes, who had once been fearless, now seemed completely disoriented. They were not the same as before. They had changed, and the human man was somehow at the center of it. "Wake them up," the captain demanded again, his voice edged with urgency. But the human simply shook his head. "They're not ready to wake up yet," he said quietly. "They need to rest." The soldiers could not understand. Why was this human, with no power, holding so much sway over the princes? What was the connection between them? And why did it seem as if the princes no longer cared about returning to their mother's empire? As the soldiers tried to make sense of it all, the human looked at the princes, then back at them. "Ide." The queen stood alone in her palace, her gaze fixed on the stars. Her throne, once the seat of unimaginable power, felt like nothing more than a cold stone now. Her sons, her heirs, the ones who would lead her empire into eternity, had been taken. Or, at least, that was what she had believed. But now, after weeks of searching, she had learned something far more disturbing. They weren't taken. They were somewhere else, on a primitive world called Earth, asleep, cradled by a human who knew nothing of their importance. The queen's mind raced with anger, confusion, and fear. How could this have happened? How could her sons, born to rule the galaxy, be so utterly vulnerable? She had built an empire from nothing, crushing any who opposed her, making her race the most feared in the cosmos. And now her sons were trapped in a place so insignificant, so beneath her, that it threatened to unravel everything she had worked for. Her fists clenched around the cold, smooth armrests of her throne. "No one," she muttered, her voice low and dangerous. "No one dares to take what belongs to me." Her most trusted advisor, Commander Valor, entered the room quietly. He could feel the rage radiating off the queen, but he had seen it before. She was never one to back down, never one to let weakness rule her actions. "Your Majesty," Valor began, bowing respectfully, "our forces are ready to launch an attack on Earth. We can retrieve the princes and bring them back. But we must proceed with caution. The humans." "Caution?" The queen's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Do you think I need caution, Valor? My sons have been taken by a mere human, and you tell me to proceed with caution?" Valor swallowed hard. "I mean only that the humans are unpredictable. We don't know what kind of forces we might be dealing with on their planet. They are primitive, but there may be more at play than we realize." The queen's anger flared again, but this time it was different. It was not just fury. It was the kind of fury born from being forced into a position of uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she was not in control, and that was something she could not allow. Her voice was ice cold as she rose from her throne. "Prepare the fleet. And this time, there will be no mercy. Earth will pay for what they've done. No one takes what is mine and gets away with it." The queen's orders were swift and final. Within hours, her armada of warships, the mightiest fleet in the galaxy, was prepared to leave. The soldiers were already positioned in their battle formations, ready for the assault. They had one goal: to bring back the princes alive and to destroy anyone who dared stand in their way. But as the fleet began to prepare for departure, a quiet unease settled over the queen. She had never lost control before. In every battle, in every conquest, she had always known the outcome. She had shaped the galaxy to her will, and no one had ever challenged that. But Earth, this insignificant, backward world, had somehow evaded her grasp. The princes, her sons, had chosen to sleep there, and she couldn't understand why. As the ships soared into the deep void of space, the queen's mind churned with thoughts of her sons. Why hadn't they called for help? Why hadn't they tried to fight back? The human on Earth was nothing like her. No, there had to be more to this. The human, the simple creature holding her sons, was something different, and that frightened the queen more than she cared to admit. Back on Earth, Zorith, the queen's most loyal general, stood with his arms crossed, staring at the princes. They had been awakened from their slumber, but something was different about them. They no longer seemed like the fierce warriors they once were. The once proud sons of the queen now seemed vulnerable, fragile even. They had not just fallen asleep. They had chosen to remain in this strange state, as though they were waiting for something. Or someone. "What has happened to you?" Zorith murmured under his breath. The human man, still lying beneath the princes, remained calm, as if the situation was no more significant than a morning stretch. He gazed up at Zorith with a gentle curiosity in his eyes. The princes, meanwhile, seemed oddly content, almost peaceful. Their once fiery personalities had dulled into something unrecognizable. "They have changed," the human said quietly. "I didn't do this. I only let them rest." Zorith's brow furrowed. The human's words held an air of mystery. "What do you mean, let them rest?" Zorith demanded. "Do you not understand who these beings are? They are heirs to an empire. Their absence has shaken the entire galaxy. You have no idea what you've done." The human shrugged, unconcerned. "Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. But they needed peace. This world, it offers them something they didn't have before." Zorith took a step forward, his voice sharp. "You have no right to speak of tea." The queen's fleet hovered in Earth's orbit, dark and foreboding, casting an ominous shadow over the small planet below. She had ordered this assault with one goal: to reclaim her sons and reassert her dominance. But as her warships loomed over the Earth's atmosphere, something inside her told her that this mission would not be as simple as she imagined. On the surface, Zorith and his soldiers had brought the princes to a remote, wooded area away from the prying eyes of the human inhabitants. The princes, though alive, still carried a strange tranquility. Their once vibrant, fiery personalities had dimmed, replaced by an eerie calm. They no longer seemed driven by ambition or desire for power. Instead, they seemed content, peaceful. But the queen would not be satisfied until she had answers. The human had done something to her sons. She was certain of it, and she would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Zoratha's voice broke through the tension as he approached the human, who was still sitting idly, gazing at the princes with an almost protective tenderness. "What have you done to them?" Zoratha's words were sharp, cutting through the thick silence. "These are no ordinary beings. They are the heirs to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Why have they allowed you to hold them like this?" The human, calm as ever, met Zoratha's gaze with steady eyes. There was no fear in his demeanor, only understanding, an understanding that made Zorath uneasy. "I haven't done anything," the human said, his voice surprisingly soothing. "I've only allowed them to be." Zoratha's confusion deepened. Allowed them to be? What does that even mean? The human turned his attention to the princes, who lay quietly, still nestled against him. He ran a hand gently through their hair, his expression thoughtful. "They've been living a life of expectation, of responsibility," he said quietly. "They've been told what to do, who to become, since the moment they were born. They've never known peace. Not like this." The word struck Zorath like a physical blow. He had never considered that the princes might be burdened by their roles as heirs to the queen's empire. He had only ever seen them as powerful, untouchable figures, symbols of strength, the future of the queen's rule. But now, as he watched them sleep in the arms of a mere human, he wondered if there was something more to this, something he had missed. The human continued. "This planet, Earth, it's different. Here they can rest. Here they can choose who they want to be, instead of who they are expected to be. I didn't force them into this. They chose it themselves." Zoratha's mind was racing. The princes chose this? How could that be? How could two beings, raised to rule an empire, willingly give up their power and surrender to the arms of a human? It made no sense. The human looked up, meeting Zoratha's eyes. "Maybe the real question is why they left. Why they came here. I'm just the person who happens to be nearby. But they're the ones who sought this out." Zorath stood frozen, his mind working overtime. Could the princes have sought out this peace themselves? Could the weight of their empire have driven them to this strange, quiet world to find something they could never find back home? The thought unsettled him. It was not just the human's presence that disturbed him. It was the shift in the prince's demeanor. They no longer seemed like soldiers. They seemed like people. The human's words continued to haunt Zoratha's thoughts. They sought this out. Meanwhile, the princes, still deep in their slumber, remained unaware of the tension in the air. The once mighty heirs to the throne of a galactic empire were now caught between two worlds. The one they had known, filled with power, control, and expectations, and the one they had found in a peaceful human's arms, a world that offered rest, freedom, and a strange sense of belonging. As Zorath watched the princes, something unexpected shifted inside him. He had always believed in the queen's unchallenged power, in the iron grip she held over the galaxy. But now, as he stood in this quiet place with the princes and this human, he began to wonder if there was another way. "What if you're wrong?" Zorath asked, his voice softer than he intended. "What if this peace is what they truly need? What if this human is giving them something we never could?" The human looked up at Zorath, his expression calm but knowing. "That's the real question, isn't it? What if you've all been so focused on the future that you forgot to ask what's best for them in the present?" Zorath hesitated. He had never doubted his queen's power before, never questioned the righteousness of her rule. But now, standing here, surrounded by the quiet, simple life of the human world, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. Was this what the princes had truly wanted all along? Or had they simply needed to escape a life dictated by their mother's expect? The queen's fleet had landed. Massive warships, sleek and deadly, lined the sky, casting long shadows over the earth. Soldiers, elite and fearsome, descended from the ships like an unstoppable tide, ready to reclaim what had been taken from their queen. The ground trembled beneath their boots as they advanced toward the humans' dwelling, where the princes still lay, untouched, at peace in his presence. The air around them seemed to grow heavy. The hum of alien technology filled the space, the queen's forces moving with military precision. Zorith stood at the forefront, his mind clouded with conflict. He had never questioned the queen's will, never considered the possibility that anything or anyone could challenge her authority. But today, everything felt different. The human, calm as ever, stood between Zorith and the princes, his arms loosely crossed. His expression remained unchanged, but there was a quiet resolve in his stance, a certainty that unnerved Zorith. "You don't have to do this," the human said softly, his voice carrying a weight of understanding. "They've found peace here, in ways you'll never understand." Zorith's heart pounded, but his loyalty to the queen held him steady. "This is not about understanding. The queen demands their return. You have no right to keep them from their destiny." The human stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Zorith. "I'm not keeping them from anything. I'm just giving them what they never had before, freedom to choose." Zorith's patience wore thin. He could see the princes stirring behind the human, their eyes fluttering open. But there was no urgency in their movements, no rush to leave the comfort of the human's arms. They were not reacting the way they should, like warriors, like heirs. Instead, they seemed almost reluctant. "Stand aside," Zorith commanded, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. "The queen has given her orders. You are in no position to negotiate." The human met Zorith's gaze, his expression unshaken. "You may be here for them, but they're not yours to take anymore. They made their choice, and they've chosen peace over war." Zorith could feel the tension rising like an unseen storm. His grip tightened around the hilt of his weapon, and the soldiers behind him shifted, eager to act. But there was something in the human's words, something in the calmness of his demeanor, that made him hesitate. The princes had always been symbols of strength and conquest, but here they were different. As the human stepped forward, the princes slowly began to rise, their movements slow, almost dreamlike. One of them, Karen, the older of the two, looked directly at Zorith. His eyes, once filled with ambition and fiery determination, now seemed calm, distant. There was no anger in them, no resistance, only a deep sense of peace. "I don't want to go back," Karen said quietly, his voice soft but firm. "Not like this. Not as a tool for war, not as a pawn in someone else's game. We've seen what peace can be, and it's not what we've been raised to believe." Zorith was struck by the words. The princes, the heirs to the queen's throne, were rejecting everything they had known. They were rejecting the life of power, of conquest, and in doing so, they were rejecting the queen's vision of the future. "You don't understand," Zorith muttered, his voice shaking slightly. "You were born for this. Your mother, the queen, has built an empire that will last forever. You are the future of our people. You cannot walk away from that." Karen's gaze softened, but his resolve remained. "And if the future is nothing but endless war? If it's nothing but control, fear, and suffering? Is that really the future we want to leave behind?" Zorith's mind raced. These were the words of someone who had seen something beyond the empire, something that the queen's tight grip had never allowed him to see. Could it be true? Had the princes, in their journey to Earth, found something the queen could never give them? Behind Zorith, the rest of the queen's soldiers shifted uneasily. They, too, were used to the queen's vision, her rule, and her power. But there was something unsettling about this moment. The human had shown them a glimpse of something different, something peaceful. Could the princes truly reject their mother's empire for a life like this? The queen's ships loomed overhead, their shadows stretching over the land. Zorith knew that the queen's patience had run thin. She would not tolerate rebellion, especially from her own sons. If they did not return with him, there would be consequences. He knew what would happen to anyone who defied the queen's will. And yet, the hesitation inside him only grew. "What is it that you want, human?" Zorith demanded, his voice hoarse. Why do you think you can change the fate of these princes? You're nothing but a fleeting moment in their lives. The human met Zoratha's gaze with quiet determination. Maybe I'm nothing, but they're E. The atmosphere around the Queen's fleet was thick with tension. She had watched from orbit as her soldiers failed to reclaim her sons, as the princes, her heirs, rejected everything she had worked for. Her empire, once as strong and unstoppable as the stars themselves, now felt fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. There was no turning back now. The Queen's anger was no longer a force to be reckoned with. It had become a wild, consuming fire. In the heart of the command center aboard her flagship, the Queen stood motionless, her fists clenched by her sides. The control panels before her flickered with reports of the failed mission, of Zoratha's failed attempt to force the princes back. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Her sons, the ones she had trained, the ones she had raised to inherit her empire, were turning their backs on everything they had been born to. It was betrayal, plain and simple. Your Majesty, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Valor, her most trusted advisor, his voice cautious. There's something you need to see. Without a word, the Queen turned, her eyes narrowing. What is it? Valor gestured toward a holographic display that shimmered to life. A series of ancient symbols flashed across the screen, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The symbols shifted and aligned into a form the Queen recognized, a prophecy. Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard of the prophecy before, long ago, whispered in the hidden corners of her empire. It spoke of a time when the empire would fall, not by an external force, but from within, a time when her own blood would rise against her, and the balance of power would shift. But she had never believed it. It was just a myth, a tale meant to scare the young and keep them in line. Valor's voice was soft but urgent. The prophecy, Your Majesty, it speaks of your sons. It speaks of the one who would challenge you, not with an army, but with the power to change everything. The Queen's breath caught in her throat. Her sons? Challenging her? Impossible. The very idea was blasphemous. They were her legacy, her blood. They were meant to rule beside her, to carry on her reign and her vision. They could not, would not, turn against her. But as the symbols on the display shifted again, revealing more of the prophecy, the Queen felt a growing unease. The words on the screen seemed to pulse with a strange energy, an energy that made her question everything she had known about her sons, her empire, and even herself. It says, Valor continued, his voice steady, that the one who awakens the princes will be the catalyst for the fall of your reign. That the princes, when awakened by a human, will lead the galaxy toward a new order, one that is not ruled by fear and power, but by choice and peace. The Queen's anger flared, her vision narrowing. A human? A mere human has caused this. Her voice cracked with disbelief. This is madness. But Valor did not flinch. Perhaps, Your Majesty, the prophecy was not about a human in the traditional sense. Perhaps it is about something else. A force beyond our understanding. The human may be a symbol, not the cause itself. But regardless, the prophecy is clear. Your sons will not return to you. They have chosen a different path, and they are the ones who will bring that new order. The Queen stared at the holographic symbols, each one reflecting back at her like the eyes of the gods. The prophecy was not just some forgotten story. It was a warning, a truth that had been written long before her birth. She had spent her entire life building her empire, but what if it was all for nothing? What if the true fate of the galaxy had never been in her hands? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? The Queen demanded, her voice low, dangerous. Valor hesitated. You would not have believed me. You would have destroyed anyone who dared question your reign. And yet, the prophecy is unfolding before us, whether we accept it or not. For a long moment, the Queen was silent. Her mind raced. The sons she had raised, the heirs she had loved and trusted, had turned against her. Not out of weakness, but out of a desire for something greater than power. Something that she had never been able to offer them. What must I do now? The Queen's voice was softer now, filled with uncertainty. If this prophecy is true, If my sons are the key to a new galaxy, then what does that mean for me? For my empire? Valor took a step closer, his eyes filled with both compassion and caution. Perhaps it is not about defeating the prophecy, Your Majesty. Perhaps it is about accepting it. Your sons have found a different path, one that does not need the empire. The galaxy is changing, and you must decide whether you will change with it or fight against it. The queen clenched her fists again, her nails digging into her palms. She had always ruled with unyielding strength. To let go now, to accept this. The queen stood alone in her command center, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The galaxy that she had ruled for centuries was slipping from her grasp, and the weight of her choices felt heavier than ever. Her sons had chosen a new path, one that defied everything she had ever believed about power, control, and destiny. And yet, there was a part of her that couldn't let go, that refused to let her empire crumble in the face of change. But the prophecy, those ancient symbols, had left a mark on her soul. Her sons were the key to a new order, a future she could neither accept nor fully comprehend. They had chosen peace over war, freedom over control, and in doing so, they had challenged everything she had worked to build. They had chosen humanity, humans, over her empire. The question now was simple. What would she do? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. The screen in front of her flickered to life, and Valor's face appeared. Your Majesty, he began, his voice grave. The princes have sent a message. The queen stiffened. She had not expected this. Her sons had not reached out to her, not after everything that had happened. Yet here they were, extending a hand from the other side of the galaxy. Was it a sign of weakness? A plea for mercy? Valor continued. They wish to meet with you. In person. The queen's heart skipped a beat. The audacity, the nerve of them. After everything that had transpired, after the rebellion, the rejection, they still wanted to meet her? What could they possibly say that would change anything? Where? She demanded, her voice cold and controlled, though inside, a storm raged. On Earth, Valor replied. They've chosen the place. They believe that this is where the future will be decided. The queen's eyes narrowed. Earth, the primitive world where everything had started, where her sons had found a peace that seemed impossible. It was the last place she would have chosen for this meeting, but she knew she had no choice. Her empire was crumbling. She had to face the reality of what was happening. The decision was made in an instant. The queen issued orders for her fleet to prepare to land on Earth. It would be a meeting like no other. The fate of the galaxy, of her empire, would be decided here, on this unremarkable world. The descent to Earth was swift, the queen's fleet cutting through the atmosphere with the precision of a predator. As the ships touched down, the queen's thoughts churned with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to crush the princes, to force them back into submission, to remind them that their fate had already been written. But another part of her wondered if they were right. Could she change? Could the galaxy change? The moment she stepped onto Earth's surface, she was greeted by an unexpected silence. The air felt different here, more alive somehow. The planet was raw, unrefined, nothing like the cold, mechanical world she had conquered. It was a stark contrast to the empire she had built. As she made her way toward the clearing where the princes had agreed to meet, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. The human, the one who had somehow become the catalyst for all this change, stood waiting at the edge of the trees. His gaze was steady, his presence calm, as if he had known all along what was about to happen. The princes were there too, standing beside him. They were no longer the arrogant, untouchable heirs she had known. They had changed, softened in a way. Their faces were no longer filled with anger or resentment, but something deeper, something that resembled understanding. You've come, Karen, the older prince, spoke first. His voice was steady, but there was no defiance in it. It was almost resigned. I have, the queen replied, her voice hard. But make no mistake, I do not come here to ask for your forgiveness. I come to reclaim what is mine. Karen shook his head, his eyes searching hers. That's the thing, mother. It was never yours to claim. A tense silence filled the space between them. The human stood a few paces behind the princes, watching the exchange with a calm, almost knowing expression. It was clear to the queen now that this human was not just some insignificant figure. He was the key to understanding her son's transformation. He had given them something she could never give them: peace. And what, exactly, do you believe you have to offer? The queen demanded, her voice low with suppressed anger. I have built an empire from nothing. My people follow me because of my strength, my will. I've given them order where there was chaos. The human stepped forward, his gaze unyielding but kind. What if the order you've given them is not the order they need? What if peace, freedom, and choice are the things your people truly desire? The queen recoiled, her fists clenching at her sides. Do not lecture me about peace, human. You know nothing of what it takes to build an empire. The